In very simple terms, allyship means to stand in solidarity with people of color. You recognize you have power because of your white privilege, and so you use that to speak up.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Welcome to Represented, the podcast. I'm Aniki Shuru, racial equity coach for online business owners who want to be intentionally inclusive by building a business that is racially equitable. I created this podcast to normalize a conversation around racial inclusion so that fear is no longer the barrier that gets in the way of doing this work. This isn't about perfection, it's about progress. Whether you're taking your first steps or you're well-versed in the journey towards racial equity, this space is for you. So welcome home, friend. Let's get started.
From coast to coast, around the globe, we are represented.
We all know first impressions count. Yet, rather than putting their best foot forward, most big-hearted, well-intended coaches are unknowingly starting their relationships with their prospective Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color clients off on the wrong foot by making statements such as the following. No, 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 no. Where are you from originally? Wow, your English is so good for a Black person. Your skin tone is not dark enough. Are you sure you're from Africa? We have a scholarship program to support people just like you. These subtle yet gut-punching microaggressions can feel like death by 1,000 cuts for a person of color as they are continually reminded they don't belong. That is why I've put together a training called Microaggressions 101, where I help you to understand how to hold safer spaces in your online coaching business that will see you serve a wider and more racially diverse audience. For instant access, head over to anigishuru.com/LT. That's anigishuru.com, gichuru.com/LT. The LT is for live training, and you can find this link in the show notes. Welcome back, and thanks so much for tuning in. Last week, we spoke about creating racially inclusive virtual events. And I love that those who do not necessarily host virtual events were really interested too, and were able to get so much out of it, and are going to be in the lookout in the future to see the spaces that they're occupying. Are they racially inclusive? And you know what? This forms such an important part of your allyship journey because you are invested in racial equity and you are intentionally looking out for it. And where it is lacking, I am hoping that you will have the courage to bring it up because you not only have the language, but you can share the ways in which an event, a virtual event, can be more racially inclusive. Now, if you haven't listened to that episode yet, this is such a good time to pause this and go back to that episode, listen, and then, friend, come back and listen to this episode. Now, this one, I diving into allyship, specifically performative allyship. But before we begin to dissect what allyship is, there's been an ongoing online argument about the term itself. Some people don't like the term at all. They feel it's not fully encompassing the role that white people should play when it comes to locking arms with people of color. Some suggested terms are, number one, accomplice. This suggests a more active role than allyship, indicating that someone is not just supportive, but is willing to take risks and actively engage in efforts to dismantle oppressive systems. Now, I actually do like that term because it involves taking risks. It's not just playing it safe, but you're actually putting yourself out on the line. You're really invested in this work. The other one is agitator. Think of a washing machine, particularly the old school ones that were top loading, and you could physically see the agitator right in the middle. And the clothes, it helped move the clothes back and forth. In essence, an agitator has had enough and is there to rock the boat. They've been doing this work for some time, and their fear factor is low, and they are all in on being anti-racist. The other term is co-conspirator. Now, it is quite similar to accomplice. This term implies an active and committed role in working alongside marginalized groups to challenge and change racist systems, even if it involves personal risk. But there's something to me about the term co-conspirator that doesn't quite resonate. It feels like there are people scheming to do something, and it kind of gives off this feeling of a negative connotation, even though I know it doesn't. However, the word advocate is one that I do like and is one that I do use because it means someone who is actively supporting and speaking up for anti-racist causes, promoting change and justice through their voice and actions, which then leads me back to the term allyship. In very simple terms, allyship means to stand in solidarity with people of color. You recognize you have power because of your white privilege, and so you use that to speak up. And you have a much stronger voice and chance of being heard and listened to than a person from the marginalized or oppressed group. I like to use the term ally because it is a term that is well known by majority of people. So there are no assumptions or misconceptions about the term. Historically, it's a term that's been used to signify friendship, having the same beliefs, and together fighting for better outcomes. But here's the thing, don't allow what term should be used here to get in the way of you doing this work of racial equity. Find the term that works for you and go with that. It's not about which one is right, which one makes you feel a certain way. It's about not allowing that to get in the way of doing this work, because at the end of the day, the most important thing is doing the work. It's not about getting the term right and feeling aligned with it. It's about rolling up our sleeves and getting to do this work. If you want to dive deeper into allyship, I'd love to recommend the book The Good Ally by Nova Reid. It's written through a British lens and it's extremely well researched and written. I love how Nova writes. She is a Black woman who is based in the United Kingdom. I think she has roots from Jamaica. And she is raw, she is real, and the amount of work she has poured into that book is second to none. I have the audio version as well as the book, the physical book itself, and it's just full of eye-opening, jaw-dropping moments that will leave you wanting to be a good ally. So now I want to share with you examples of performative allyship, which can also be referred to as performative activism. Firstly, token social media posts. Remember back in 2020 when it was Black Square Tuesday following the murder of George Floyd, and so many people were posting on their Instagram black squares and standing in solidarity with people of color and saying hashtag Black Lives Matter. Now, there are those who did that, and that was the only thing that they did. Clearly they were not invested in this work. This was just something they did so that they could look like that they were being a good person. But in actual fact, it's called virtue signaling because you want to look a certain way in the public, but when it comes to reality, that's not who you are. It is therefore not genuine. It is performative. Number two, minimal or inconsistent representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. The only time you ever had a person of color on your podcast or event is back in 2020, and you've never done anything more. It's like you ticked a box and you moved on, and the work of racial equity is not something that is of substance to you. It is something where you normally have a knee-jerk reaction when the headline's happening. You're like, oh, I need to do something. And so it's minimal, it's inconsistent, it's not something that is part of your value system. Number 3, performative donations, donating money once. Why? Because it's easy to do and it takes the guilt away and you don't have to do the work. You don't get to really engage in the issue. It is really playing it safe and kind of patting yourself on the back, going like, I've done something good for anti-racism. And whilst your money is needed, it is needed on an ongoing basis. A one-time donation may not necessarily see us make really big moves, but it is your continued donation. But not just donating. How are you investing in understanding this work? I'm going to take a short break now, and when I come back, I'll share with you 2 more performative allyship examples, and I'll share with you the next steps that you can take today.
Doing the represented call with Annie was incredible. It was life-changing. It was business elevating. It was deep. It was challenging. It was inspiring. It was important. It's necessary. And I feel very much changed after it. I feel as though being a part of represented and deep diving into these learnings has really cultivated a stronger sense of advocacy, of activism, of allyship, both in my personal world, my personal life, and my business. I cannot speak highly enough in terms of Annie and the way she facilitates this space. She created such a safe environment for us to explore and discuss, and have potentially uncomfortable conversations in a way that I hadn't seen facilitated before. She really calls you up into your highest and holds you there and teaches from that place, and it's incredibly empowering. I feel as though represented as a whole, it's a learning, but it's very much an experience. It's illuminating and will change the way you operate in your life and your business forevermore. There is no way you cannot come out from this unchanged in the best of ways. It's really upgraded and shifted the way that I am and commit to being in business from here on out. So a full-hearted recommendation from me. Yeah, it's incredible. And I believe so much in the work that Annie is doing. And I cannot imagine anyone better than her to learn and explore this DEI work with. So if it's calling you, I would recommend you dive right in.
Welcome back. Point number 4, example number 4, DEI statements without action. Publishing a statement affirming diversity, equity, and inclusion, or worse still, one you've copied and pasted without any action to back up your statement. This is not only misleading, but hear me when I say this, it is dangerous to do, because where underrepresented and underserved people believe these statements, they may engage with you and your business only to find out it's actual BS. So just don't do it. Number 5, silencing or manipulating Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices. And this I have seen often happen during International Women's Day, inviting them to speak or be part of a campaign, but limiting their input, not providing them with proper compensation, sidelining their contributions once the publicity phase is over, requesting that they submit their keynote before speaking to check if it is suitable. asking them to tone it down if it is not, because it might upset the stakeholders. I know some of these things sound ridiculous, but these are real life examples. And so, my friend, if you've ever found yourself in a situation where you're asking yourself, am I being performative? This is probably a harsh response, but you probably are. Because when you are being genuine, you don't ask yourself if you are being genuine. In the context of friendship, let's use this as an example. Do you call up your bestie and ask if you are being a genuine friend? No, you don't. You just know because of how invested you are in the relationship. And so, to recap on those 5 points, number 1, performative allyship is when you post on social media in a tokenistic way. Number 2, minimal or inconsistent representation of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Number 3, performative donation of money. 4, DEI statements without action. And number 5, silencing or manipulating Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices when you invite them to events. So you're listening to this and going like, Annie, I feel like you're talking about me here, or I may be guilty of one of those 5 things. What do? I don't want to continue to be performative. I didn't even realize I was being performative. I actually thought by donating money back in 2020 or every now and then was being genuine, but I realize how this might come across as being tokenistic, as being performative. How can I do better? I actually have a dedicated entire module inside my signature program called Represented. This module is all about allyship and advocacy. And I teach you what it means to advocate, what it means to be an ally, the do's and don'ts. And we get into things like calling in rather than calling out. And this by far is my favorite module. And it's one where you actually get to roll up your sleeves and get to work to doing the work that is necessary to help us move the needle forward. And so, if this is work that has spoken to you in any way, I'd love to invite you to consider joining the next round. Head over to anigishuru.com/represented to find out more and to join the waitlist.
We are represented. We are represented. We are represented.
Thank you so much for tuning in. Why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave a review so this podcast can reach more online business owners, and together we can begin to normalize racial inclusion in the online coaching space. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where this podcast episode was recorded, the Wiradjuri people in central New South Wales, Australia. Music produced in Nairobi, Kenya by Patrick St. P. Mbaru and Kambua Mathu. Vocals by Joanne Matata.
Represented from coast to coast.